Most of you should remember when you registered, or maybe if it was a while ago, you might not, but we asked you what your burning questions were on these topics and what success would look like for coming out of the event. And so we went through all of that and really tried to design the agenda accordingly, and wanted to just reflect some of that back to you to see what others in the group were looking for and what was top of mind for them. So this is kind of a mix of the questions and what success would look like, but far and away, everybody wanted to make connections. So hopefully this format will really encourage that. A lot of desire to hear what other endowments were doing, what your peers are doing. So we've got some great case studies on the agenda, but again, a lot of that will come out through the conversations as well. Quite a bit around kind of related topics of data, measurement, transparency, reporting, both sort of in the finance industry in general, but also on the part of endowments to see what steps they're taking around these topics. Very solid interest in net zero, climate, divestment, as well as justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, which are sort of the key themes of the network. So that wasn't too much of a surprise. A lot of interest in kind of the broad governance and fiduciary duty piece. Quite a bit on the anti-ESG political environment, which we'll talk about in our first session. Obviously, some questions and thoughts around stakeholder engagement and working with students. But I thought this last one was maybe the most interesting just because of where it fell on the list. Financial performance has always been top of the list, but I think it has been sort of falling down the list, not because it's any less important, and certainly it's embedded in the fiduciary duty questions and embedded in all of this. But I think it shows in some ways that we're maybe moving past that question, that there's enough data and experience to show that these strategies do perform well as or better than traditional strategies, and that's less of a concern, but obviously still very central to all of these conversations. So with that, quick rapid fire context setting. It's my great pleasure to kick us off with our first panel and fireside chat. Very honored and thrilled to have Shiva Rajgopal, Columbia University professor who's done a lot of work on these topics, and including speaking out and writing and really helping to add some clarity to the conversations in the context of some of the political backlash and media campaigns around ESG. So very pleased that he made the trip down to share his insights. And Andrew Pereda from Sage will be sharing some of their perspectives, also in the middle of much of this work in a fireside chat. So with that, I will hand it over to Andrew to get us going. Thank you.
ESG, all of you have probably heard in the news, what is ESG, right? And there's a lot of different opinions that go around when you hear the word letters ESG, right? It's just an acronym, environment, social, governance. But what does that mean to you? I think as an investor, we have to be very cognizant of what actually ESG means. And so I want to first off set the definition so that we can then have a conversation, right? There sometimes are ESGs as product in terms of like investment strategy, but then what I think is most important is ESG as a process. And I want to highlight that because a lot of the things we're going to talk about later today are about the process, and ESG fits into a lot of these discussions, right? Net zero, DEI, all these other topics. I think it's very important to set that stage. And so this is a process to both, one, act as a risk management tool, and two, identify future opportunities. And so why the need now? All of you probably have seen in the news lately, right? What was September? It was the hottest month on record for September ever. And the summer was also the hottest ever. What does that mean? These risks we see from the climate are not something that you as an investor are immune to. You are exposed to all of these risks in different ways. And I think that's the important part, is kind of knowing that everything that falls into these environmental, social, governance levels, they're all things that matter to you as investors. And so I think we have to make sure that we that are supportive of these, understand these issues, understand that these are, in terms of financial performance is gone, but these affect the financial performance. And so it's not woke, it's not greenwashing, these are issues that are integral to operating as an investor successfully. And so I think we have to be cognizant of that. But then also, we start talking about what's going on in the world in terms of the economy, right? Back in 1970s, PPE, plant, property, equipment, that was the name of the game. That was where the most value in terms of assets, like where companies had their, that was their bottom line. It was running those factories to make money, essentially. But now where are we, right? What is the value of companies? Back in 1975, on the S&P 500, 17% of the assets were intangible. And what I mean by intangible, I mean human capital, R&D, patents. Those were 17%. Anybody know what it is now in 2020 for on the books of the S&P 500? Over 90%. So we have moved an economy to a largely service-based economy where instead of now looking at our plants, we now look at people. We look at what is our company worth in terms of intellectual property? So how do you measure that? Shiva here is an expert accountant. He's going to tell you, like, how does traditional accounting capture some of those risks and opportunities? Does it?
It doesn't.
It doesn't, right? And so that's the need of like why ESG is very important, and it's a evolving process. It's a work in progress, but it's integral to dealing with a lot of these issues as well as opportunities. So this is how we set the stage for that. And I think all of you've seen there's various places where ESG is under attack, right? Federal government, we see ESG under attack from different rules. Department of Labor trying to basically, we've had lawsuits to try to basically take away the ability to, as a fiduciary, consider ESG factors. That's under attack and still under attack. Fortunately, there was a bill, or excuse me, in Amarillo, Texas, the judge was actually one that you would think would side with the plaintiffs, struck it down and said, no, these are financial material issues. As a fiduciary, you should consider those things or have the ability to consider. And then we also see Supreme Court. We see now that even though DI being struck down by the Supreme Court, that affects college campuses, which all of you are very familiar with. The fear is, though, is that companies now may be next, right? And so this is an important thing. And so you start talking about people, right? And like issues like DEI, how does that affect, talk about, your corporate culture, all these other issues, your development of talent. Now you're telling me that we might not be able in the future to use those. So we're in a very contentious space. And so, Professor, I would like to see your take on, you've been on Capitol Hill, you've talked with critics, you've seen some of their insight. What do you see as the potential challenges, as also as what landscape do you see moving forward as terms of areas to be addressed in 2024, both from a pro-ESG perspective as well as a negative ESG perspective?
Thank you. So let me just step back a little bit, and first of all, thank you for having me here. This is much prettier than being at Columbia, so and much safer nowadays as well. So is there a big idea behind ESG? Right? People often claim it's some kind of loose agglomeration of three terms put together by a UN committee, E and S and G. Do they all belong together? So I've thought a lot about what is the big idea. So let's start there, since we're at the beginning of the conference and so on. And again, I'm going to use a classic income statement analogy. How many of you actually read 10Ks? Sometimes. Thank God, at least some of them do. The others need to take an accounting class. So let's step back. So what are the big ideas? I think there are three big ideas behind ESG. Idea number one. So if you look at, say, an income statement of Coca-Cola, right? Lots of businesses use some version of natural capital. Now, what does Coca-Cola do? It uses water, it uses soil. We all know about carbon. By and large, we set the cost of natural capital in our income statements to zero. Now, I don't know how to value natural capital, but I know it's not zero. So that's the first observation. The second observation is that the reporting model in general does a pretty poor job of capturing externalities. What does that mean? Passive smoking is an externality. Carbon's an externality. But there are also positive externalities that companies create. Now think about Zoom. How much do you pay for a license to get Zoom? I don't know, like $100 a month, a year, whatever. The value that Zoom adds to your life is like 10 times more or 20 times more. Vaccine. Pfizer, for instance, of course, the CEO at Pfizer made a lot of money. BioNTech made a lot of money. But the money that they saved all of us by stopping, COVID, perhaps maybe 6, 8, 9, 10 months before, was huge. So we ignored both negative and positive externalities. So ESG need not be a defensive conversation, is the point. And the last point, increasingly worry that the link between the owner and the manager nowadays is almost non-existent. What do I mean by that? Passive indexing, is fantastic for all of us as individuals. I'm not so sure about what it does in the entire system. Who's reading a 10K anymore? Most of us are basically buying labels. Who's policing the label? I often joke when I go to a grocery store, what am I buying? Natural or eggs, for instance, right? I'm a vegan, but I eat eggs. So omega-6, omega-3, free range, I have no idea. It's the exact same problem with the world of mutual funds. Not just ESG. What is value? What is quality? How many of us have seen a definition of quality in a quality ETF? So the third idea here being managerial accountability, right? So to me, as a framework, these are the three big ideas or four big ideas that ESG tries to hit. Now, the practice of ESG, sadly, politely put, is a work in process, right? It's measurements complicated. There's hardly any clarity on what one needs to do. What is your focus? If you're an E fund, maybe you'll put money into Tesla. If you care about S, maybe not so much. With G, who knows how to think about G for Elon Musk? Is he a mad genius? Is he mad? Is he a genius? Who knows? But and that's the other issue. You know, we don't talk about G anymore. G is like arguably the most important of the three letters. And have we just given up on G? Maybe. Who knows? But I can just go on and on. So to me, that's the big issue, and the dispute and Capitol Hill kind of idea. One of the nice things about Capitol Hill is that it's a evidence-free, fact-free conversation. Unlike even a classroom, people just say anything they want, frankly. So one way to crystallize that in my mind is that the anti-ESG crowd probably worries about next year's EPS. The pro-ESG crowd perhaps worries about 20, 30, 40 years out EPS. So, which is the other conversation we should have. How much of this is values versus value? How do these things interact? And if you're investing for values, that's fine. Just know what the trade-offs are, basically. That's the other problem. You know, we don't want to talk about, we have a world of trade-off denial, right? There is no such thing as a free lunch. So anyway, I'll stop there.
I would say that any of you want to talk offline about Tesla, Elon Musk might be bugging my house being out of Austin. But I do think that, you know, hit it on the head. You guys all saw FTX scandal that emerged, right? That was just bad governance in action. And I would say that, in my mind, and it's, you know, it's open for debate, I think that you have to really understand too that they're all linked together, right, to the bottom line of the company. And sometimes E&S issues are a trade-off, right? You might, if you're a utility company and you push for more renewable power, it may cost your consumers more from a kilowatt hour perspective, right? So there are going to be trade-offs sometimes. It's not always a win-win, and that has to be managed together, right? And so ESG is an integral part, but it shouldn't be just looked at standalone from a company and how it operates. But I do think that that's a key point. But I do think also for all of you in the room, the idea of values versus value is a hugely important topic. And sometimes they do align. And so as you start looking at these, as your endowments all have missions usually associated with financial performance, think about an issue like climate change. You know, they're divesting from fossil fuels, hugely important topic, right? And some may say that we have a moral imperative to divest from fossil fuels and we'll act on it. That can also, though, be, even though that's a mission and part of that statement, it can also have financial performance impacts. And we've actually seen that pension funds that divested actually did better than those that didn't, right? As you talk about what timeline you're operating at, endowments, how long do you want your college campus to be around for? Hopefully 100 years from now. And so even in the short term, when oil and gas is doing very well, it may make sense from a long-term perspective to look past that and to see what's going to be successful in a future economy. So there are sometimes where values and values can align. I think it just has to be clear from all of you in the room. If you're a trustee, why are you making certain actions? When you develop your investment policy statements and you start thinking about how you're actually operating, have those conversations. Look at, what am I doing? Am I doing this just to enact a cause? Am I doing it for financial performance? Am I balancing it? I think it's very key to have those discussions because I think it'll help guide you as a trustee moving forward. And so I can't underestimate that enough. But I also, though, in terms of thinking of this, you start talking about 2024 and beyond. Where are you seeing like areas that maybe there could be bipartisan support, where there could be an interest from both sides, where we can kind of see things on the same page, though it may not look like that now? I think when you start pulling it back, there is a lot of room for agreement on some of these issues. You see any sort of, you know, so aha moments where you think people can get, we're obviously very supportive here in this room mostly, but, you know, going across the aisle, so to speak, like where can we kind of find, you know, common ground?
Well, I have modest expectations, right? We can start with human capital. Maybe that's I mean, how can you be against treating people well? And hopefully, we don't need more evidence to show that motivated people actually map into future cash flows. But having said that, again, I'm going to go back to our reporting model. Barely 15% of US companies actually tell you what their compensation costs are. Okay, seriously. I don't know compensation costs for about 85% of the US companies. They just don't tell you. So even before we get excited about things like turnover, skills, productivity, which is stuff that we would like to know, it would be a nice start to at least know the dollar amount of compensation costs. So the FASB's kind of finally pushed that through after a lot of pressure. The intangibles problem. You know, we've had an intangibles reporting problem since the days of NASDAQ, by definition. The whole point of NASDAQ was to set up companies that don't necessarily make accounting profits, right? It's been like 50 years. You know, we've done a lot of things in 50 years, and we can't seem to figure out how to put intangible assets on the balance sheet somehow. So part of the problem, I would say, again, you know, there's like a $40 trillion AUM coalition pushing for climate reporting. There's not even 1 trillion worrying about what shows up on a 10K. So if there's one thing all of you could do, read 10Ks, put pressure, because you're the customers. Investors are barely represented in this rulemaking process. It's usually, in my mind, captured by CFOs and auditors. Maybe intangibles, maybe human capital. You can do a lot more, but let's start there.
Yeah, and I would say this too, since I think this is very important to the room here. So we talk about ESG. One of the big things that may not get talked about in that construct is this idea of stewardship, right? There is so much you can do with your investments that's not just buying and selling certain stocks and bonds. And I think that's one of the key things is looking at how can I be an active owner, right? There's passive funds. That does not mean that you can't be an active owner. And I think there's a big distinction there. So when you engage with companies on certain issues, like I said, demand more information on the 10K. If that's something that you feel is important, work through those proper channels. And if you have the ability to vote on certain issues, be educated, but actually exercise that vote if you have the ability to do so, because these are huge, important issues. And a lot of times we see actually a pushback in the industry as a whole, where people are trying to be more passive and hands-off and trying to push it to somebody else to make the decision. And so if you have the ability to make a decision, I would own it and not try to pass it to somebody else. So I'm happy to talk about that, in smaller groups, but I do think that's a huge important topic that is not necessarily always focused on, and it's more the what are you holding, what are you not holding? Because I would say this, if you also want impact, sometimes investing in high emitting sectors, if you want to impact climate change, that's the place to do it. So there are other ways to look at it. So don't always just be set in terms of what you buy and sell. There are plenty other ways also to have impact and influence in your investments.
Engagement? Yeah, we can talk about engagement if you like. So we can talk about anything.
I think we're
throw me a prompt. Yeah, no.
Cognizant of time, but I think the goal is here is that there's a lot. We want you to be supportive, and I do think in these small group settings, please ask those questions. There are things that we all will not agree on. I'm hoping to talk to the professor offline about an issue that's important to me in terms of we see California. They placed a bill that requires Scope 3 emissions as part of their package, climate disclosure as well as then Scope 3. Personally, it's going to be a contentious topic. It's something that many people probably have never had to look at, but it's the idea that we want to report on emissions across the entire value chain. So conceptually, it sounds really important, right? You think about fossil fuels, right? You get it out of the ground, you give it to the customer, and then ultimately it's off your books from a climate accounting perspective. And now the consumer is the one that gets to use it. Obviously, that's problematic, but there are issues with reporting. So sometimes too is what you demand, you have to be careful is, are we demanding too much and are we having smart conversations in terms of disclosure? Is it reasonable? We can't just always ask for everything. So I think that's too, when you start having a company, the same thing applies, right? You can't say just yes to every want and need. It's a finite balance that you have to be able to be cognizant of. So that's the other part too that I think when you think about these, you have those priorities, right? You see net zero, JEDI, financial performance, you're trying to balance all of them. Think about that careful dance and understand how some of them may have different, you can only ask for so many things, and it sometimes is a difficult challenge to say yes to everything. And that could be also the same with your investments too, in terms of,
So just a couple of quick comments on California, if you want. Are we done?
You can do it.
Okay, sorry, let's go to questions.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
So you touched on FASB. So IFRS is
IFRS, that's the international version.
They've adopted the SASB standards as a foundation. Will that ever happen with FASB?
You mean the ISSB that got set up?
Yeah.
No. Well, I don't know. Maybe, but yeah. All four-letter words, right? So IFRS simply means okay. So when you write a scorecard, you need some kind of rules of the game to actually figure out what the score means, right? Those things are called another four-letter word, GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. So in the US we have US GAAP, which arguably works very well, except for the intangibles issue and a few other issues. So the rest of the world, everybody had their own way of keeping score. And then there was a push a while back to harmonize this. That is IFRS. So think of IFRS as international accounting principles. Hopefully everybody here knows the SASB. So IFRS, when there's a move to kind of integrate IFRS and SASB, call it integrated reporting, meaning the financial stuff doesn't have to live in a silo compared to the other risk management type stuff. And overseas, now we have something called the ISSB. Think of that as IFRS plus SASB or something like that. A happy marriage, which created an ISSB. So the question is, will we see something like that in the US? I mean, I think the political pushback is massive. In my view, the FASB, as I said, I'm not sure there's much investor representation on the FASB. So unless you guys ask for it, the preparers and the auditors don't want any of this. It's very hard to audit a scope 3 emission, especially in a litigious environment like the US. Why would I bother if I'm an auditor to kind of certify any of that? Right? So unless we solve the underlying economic tensions, litigation, more demand from users and investors to push rule makers, it's going to be a hard slog. For him, for me, yeah. Uh-huh.
You could wave a magic wand.
What do you do? It's not difficult. I mean, it's a trivial problem, frankly. I mean, so consider, say, the pharma model, right? So you have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 or something. You go through the whole FDA process. So what is the big idea? Why did we start expensing R&D? So back in the day when the rule was written, and that's why it's so ossified, right? In the 60s and the 70s, the idea was that R&D is risky. Nobody says it doesn't lead to profits, but it's risky. So accounting is driven by conservatism. So if you're conservative, you don't book this as an asset. Where did this conservatism come from? Mostly creditors and auditors, because if you put an asset on the books, the auditor doesn't want to really go and certify that this is really worth what it is. So just follow that model. I would say the easiest thing to do is let the manager decide. 80% of the time, managers won't lie. There will, of course, be 20% of the folks who will lie, but that's what the ecosystem is supposed to work. What is the board doing? Where are sell-side analysts? What about short sellers? So the ecosystem in general, by and large, keeps the system honest. So even if 20% of them overstate the value of their intangible, that's fine. We'll figure it out. But to avoid maybe 10 or 20% of managers from overstating the numbers, we're actually doing a massive disservice by leaving out arguably 90% of the value from our balance sheets. And when you leave stuff out, narrative takes over. How do I even know if Amazon is correctly priced? Because the manager is always going to spin some narrative. And how do I stress test the narrative? I'm a trust but verify kind of guy. If I don't trust, I become too cynical. But I'd like to verify.
So something like capitalized software.
Yeah, something like that. And there's a feasibility constraint. Part of the problem here is that the auditors, in my mind, don't want to exercise professional judgment. Write me a rule so I don't get sued. It's their business model. Well, yes, they're very successful at that, but there's a cost that the others bear. And investors, in my mind, are simply not vocal enough. If there were a $1 trillion AUM coalition to push for intangibles, you'll get it. You don't need 40 trillion.
Who's doing the best work figuring out how to price natural capital?
Externalities. Who's doing the best work? Who's doing any work?
Initiatives. I think there's one at Harvard Business School.
Well, it's a complicated problem, right? What is the social cost of carbon? The Biden administration put a number like $185 or something. There were lawsuits on that. I think the perfect is the enemy of the good, partly. Start somewhere, like say $100 number. I don't know whether it's 100 or 185, but it's not $10. That's the price of these offsets these days. So start somewhere commonsensical, or at least start with some low-hanging fruit. Let's fix intangibles. Let's probably fix human capital. We at least have some conversation about social cost of carbon. How do you think about water? It's a local issue. For example, Coca-Cola says it's water neutral. I can understand carbon neutral. I don't know what water neutral means, right? What's the point in taking water away from a place that needs it and replenishing it in a different country, for instance? So what's the social cost of unrecycled plastic? I don't know. But at least let's start somewhere. It's not the price. It's not zero, right? At least start with some range. Common sense tells us maybe it's between 100 and 120 in the case of carbon. Start with 150. It doesn't have to be precise. Otherwise, you'll never make any progress. Part of the problem in my mind, apologies to all the NGOs in the room, this area has too many NGOs. NGOs like perfection.
Now,
sometimes NGOs don't want to talk about trade-offs.
We are out of time, but I will offline love talking to you about that from what investors are doing. I think the effort is starting. The accuracy of it is still work in progress, but there are starting to be some ground up movement on that particular topic. So happy to talk about that later. And we are done. And
anyway, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm really glad to see you all on this beautiful sunny day. I am IEN's program manager for climate justice, which I advance through our net zero initiative, but also events like this one. So you've all seen me in your inbox. But it is really a pleasure to introduce our first panel of the day, which will be a case study on Virginia Wesleyan University, and you'll hear from our panelists. They will share their experiences, building consensus to create Virginia Wesleyan's investment policy. So really excited and looking forward to it, and hope you all enjoy. And with that, I will turn it over to Ali.
I think all of us would agree that, good governance and a clear strategy is pretty critical to making progress in a unified direction over time. And so I'm, really fortunate to have a great panel here who can give you different perspective on how Virginia Wesleyan's done that. The president, one of the trustees, and a student, so definitely an integrated approach. I'm with Brown Advisory, a portfolio manager there, and fortunate to work with Virginia Wesleyan as part of this journey. One of the things that was also said early that, I think is really important is that it is a journey, right? I think sometimes in this type of work, getting too focused on the details can be the perfection can be the enemy of the good. And so I know we all are united in this room, at least, on the opportunity to be more sustainable, to influence kind of a better world with the assets we manage. I mean, sometimes at Brown, we talk about it as the other 95%. So you're trying to generate around a 5% spend to fund the institution, but how are you using that other 95% to be aligned with the values of your organization? And so I think, nothing's as helpful as hearing a specific story from how it's worked in practice. So with that, why don't I let the panelists introduce themselves? And it was suggested by IEN that we do a little icebreaker here. And so what's the one word that you would use to describe the transition that you've been on recently?
Hi, everybody. I'm Scott Miller, president of the university, and we're delighted to have you here in Virginia Beach, where it's always 75 and sunny. How about 75 and sunny? No. Teamwork, and we'll explain more about that in a little bit.
I'm Gary Bonniwell. I'm a class of 79, excuse me, at Virginia Wesleyan. I was also the first alumni to be the board chair, and so I've been on the board. I was calculating, it's a little bit over 30 years. I don't think with no interruption, so it's kind of unique. So.
My name's Rowan Stewart, technically senior this year, so excited to be graduating this spring and transitioning into an MBA program here. And for my one word, I would say exciting.
All right, so I think we were going to start with sort of just an overview of Virginia Wesleyan's process over the past few years, because they've really had a lot of sort of great opportunity with the endowment, but also a lot of change. And so as part of that, it's been, a significant involvement by both the leadership and the trustees and sort of how to navigate that. So Gary, you were going to start and also, I think, just set the groundwork for us in terms of the terms we're using.
Yeah, I being at a Methodist institution, John Wesley started the movement, which this university is named after, and I think he probably actually set the groundwork for this kind of investing. And do all you can do, and all the means you can do, and all the ways you can do, and all the places you can do, and all the times that you can do, with all the people that you can do for as long as you can do. It's about doing the right thing. And I think that's how we've approached this process here. If you have that one thought in mind, not how much money can you make or how much alpha can you get, but about doing the right thing for all the right people, for the environment, for all these things, then it sets the stage. And that's sort of been a philosophy of the university going back all these years, because it was a group of people that came together and always working for the good of the university. So the culture that we've had here has always been the initial part. Now, I must say, everything I'm saying today is of educational purposes, and it's not to be considered a buy or sell recommendation, and no investment advice is being given by me. Let me just put that last part in.
All right. Okay, so President Miller, why don't you get into the weeds a little bit about this?
Sure, and while the four of us are all different parts of the team, I think Rowan didn't really explain, he's part of the Batten Honors College, and he's one of the 160 scholars in that group that are an elite group of students from all over the world that have come here as a result of this endowment that was provided by a very generous donor. But I also need to introduce 3 other members of the team who are here. Dr. Travis Malone is the Dean of the Batten Honors College. Elizabeth Malcolm is the Director of Sustainability, and she's the person, stand up, Elizabeth, you're always so shy about things. She's the one who sets the agenda for all of us, and we'll talk about our environmental guiding principles. I've been here 8 years, but Elizabeth has been the one who's aligned the priorities, and it has been the wonderful donor support that we've received that has been enabled us to really forward the agenda that she started. My focus, and again, college presidents, when you get them going, could go for 3 hours, and we have only a very select period of time, so they told me keep it to 7 minutes. So I'm going to be very structured in this approach, and hopefully, yeah, we've got some of this up on the screen. My focus will be on the how-to, and then we'll talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts and open the floor up for discussion. I first got involved with what was then the American College and University President's Climate Commitment in 2006. And the original group of 15 formulated the plan, and 35 additional presidents joined them in Washington for the very first meeting. I was in my 2nd presidency at the time, and through involvement down through the years, I've gained momentum that's led me to my career capstone environmental experience here at Virginia Wesleyan in Virginia Beach, which everything has come together beautifully. A beautiful campus in a park-like setting in coastal Virginia with donors who are excited about the environment. Who could ask for more? It was my involvement with ACU PCC and Second Nature in 2006 that first introduced me to George. And at the time, he was with ACU PCC and Second Nature, eventually the vice president, before moving over to be the leader for IEN. And it was his move over to IEN that inspired our interest in moving our endowment to align with a lot of the principles that IEN stands for. I'm uniquely positioned as the only president in the country to have presided over 3 signatory institutions since the founding of the group. In 2015, when I joined Virginia Wesleyan, I was inspired by the location and the commitment to the principles espoused by Second Nature and the Climate Leadership Network. So in 2014, just before my arrival, a donor made a commitment to fund a world-class center for environmental sciences. And if on break, I guess you're going to get to see it maybe during the reception. It's the building out the front door and all the way at the end. It's at the end of the quad. Beautiful, state-of-the-art facility that really sets the tone for us being leaders in the environment. In 2016, the donor committed initial funding to start an honors college in 2017 with a primary focus on environmental issues. In 2018, when we became one of the early members of the Intentional Endowment Network, it was a modest level of support that we had in the endowment, and we were still setting as a priority ESG as something that we aspired to. In 2019, with our friends at Allegheny College in Pennsylvania, Virginia Wesleyan established its version of the environmental guiding principles. And as we all know, presidents change, deans change, boards change, students turn over. The environmental guiding principles are embedded in all the policy and operational activities here on campus, and they withstand the test of time. And this is critically important to us as we discuss the endowment. I mentioned a gift in 2015 to construct a world-class environmental center. The center's 44,000 square feet, features a sophisticated indoor and outdoor learning space that embodies science on display and promote hands-on experiences, interactive learning, and interdisciplinary research. While the center is a major benefit to students studying in the environmental sciences, all students from all majors benefit from this magnificent facility. Our recognition as National Conservationist of the Year by the Chesapeake Bay Foundation created widespread visibility and niche building opportunities. It expanded our relationship with 11 regional environmental organizations, and provided unmatchable opportunities for students wanting to study in coastal Virginia. So about halfway through the 2-year process of constructing the Environmental Sciences Center, we entered into discussions with the donor about an academic program that might complement this soon-to-be-completed state-of-the-art facility. And the donor suggested that an honors college with a focus on the environment in a location like ours would develop into a national niche program for the university. So after months of developing the model, the donor agreed to fund the program with annual contributions for the first 4 years. The Honors College opened in 2017, coinciding with the opening of the Environmental Sciences Center. The opening was greeted with tremendous success, 30,000 inquiries per year, incredibly high selectivity, and rave reviews from students, parents, and the media. Every student had a focus on the environment no matter what major they were in. Every student had a funded international experience. Every student had a funded leadership experience, mostly in Washington, D.C. So we're proud to have Rowan Stewart, a student from the Baton Honors College, on the panel with us today. And there will be several others that will interact with you during your visit here. By 2021, the success of the program had attracted much attention. The results were convincing. The original donor committed $23.2 million to start an endowment for the program. About 2.5, 2.6, 3 years ago, the donor came back to us and made an additional $60 million gift to create a total endowment of $80.3 million for the Baton Honors College. So we have 160 students. 80 of them are on full tuition scholarships. 80 of them are on 3/4 tuition scholarships. And they also get funded experiences in a foreign country, experience the environment in coastal Virginia. 3 conditions of the gift. The gift would remain anonymous, the donor would. The $80.3 million for the endowment of the Honors College was set as a guarantee that the mission of the Honors College would focus on the environment. And third, that all endowment funds would be invested in an environmentally friendly way. So Brown Advisory of Baltimore, Maryland, and a member of IEN agreed to invest our funds utilizing the network's checklist to align investment practices with institutional mission through sustainable investing. Shortly after investing the initial $80.3 million with Brown, our board voted unanimously to move the entirety of our endowment to Brown Advisory for environmentally friendly investing. So that meant over $120 million is now in our portfolio with Brown Advisory, and everything is being moved from a former investment manager to this new endowment fund with the specifications that as we transition, it'll go to environmentally friendly investing. Since then, Brown Advisory has also made a $50,000 gift to start the Brown Advisory Student Managed Investment Fund. There's a dedicated finance and investment lab in Clark Hall for students to use in this capacity. There's also a corresponding class in which experts from this field, like Allie, like Gary, like David Kaufman, former board chair, and many others can share their knowledge and best practices with our students. So it's been an exciting time at Virginia Wesleyan as we've worked to put this responsible investing aspect of our sustainability goals into action. And I thank Elizabeth for having the vision. I thank our donor for providing the funds, and I thank our entire team for the roles that they have had in putting this together. I'll stop and let you lead us through.
I know everybody, I think the student perspective is really important to why we all do a lot of the work we do. And so Rowan, I'll get to you in just 1 second. But I think one thing that might be helpful for the audience in advance is really the investment policy statement part, because that's really critical to how you're actually defining what you're doing. And so, what we've seen work well with a lot of institutions is kind of tackling that as a small working group and then moving that to the larger committee. And Gary, maybe you want to talk a little bit about the approach at Virginia Wesleyan, because I think it modeled after that.
Yeah, again, because we've always had a very collegial board, I think it made it easy. The directive by the donor on part was clear, but the remaining part that was at another advisor was not so clear. We wanted to make sure as a fiduciary we did everything that was required by us. The first gift was sort of directed, the other part was not, and so I think that was where we probably spent more time coming up with some of the difficult, heavy lifting is, should we move it, how much should we move, when should we move? The investment policy statement, I think, came about methodically. It was, part, we hired, an outside investment office to handle things, but our guidance in how that gets done is very important. But the cumulative part, and I think that's the other part, is do you want all your investments this way, in one advisor, or do you want to leave them the way they were with two sides? For me, that was the harder part, was to make that decision. But I think it was the cumulative aspect of how it was going to be managed, how the investment policy statement came about, and then it was easier to say, yes, this makes more sense to combine it.
And that came from the process that Elizabeth really led on the formulation of the environmental guiding principles for the entire institution. And our friends at Allegheny College assisted us. As far as we know, they may be the first in the business to have that embedded in all their policies. I don't know that I've heard of anybody else. Have you, Elizabeth? But that touches all areas of the institution, and the financial side of it came as a result of those environmental guiding principles. And I might also add an advertisement for IEN, because our donor had seen the materials that we share. You get all those emails all the time that George and Nicole are sending out. Beautiful graphics and everything, but we share them rather extensively. And, our donor said there's something to think about in the materials that they're sending, and it led us down this path. So kudos to IEN also.
And I'll say as the outside manager, having those principles so readily available was a tool for us in terms of understanding the university's values and objectives. So I think the work done to document all of that was really helpful in articulation of the investment policy statement. So Rowan, it's about you and the next generation and how we can support scholars like you and also sort of the world going forward. Why don't you talk a little bit about your perspective on this?
Yeah, great. So I'd say the majority of the role from the student perspective has been through the IEN Corporate Engagement Challenge and through the recently established fund. So I'll be speaking about the IEN Corporate Engagement Challenge first. In my freshman year, myself and Connor Merck were approached by Dr. Malone about the IEN Challenge and how we thought that it would be in line with the values of the Baton Honors College with the environmental stewardship that we wish to practice. So Connor Merck and I sat down and thought, well, how's the best way to go about this? We started by putting together a diverse team of students. So it was students of political science, it was students of business, sustainability, data science, all these individuals which could take this very broad topic of environmentalism and hone it into their individual niches so that we could have an appropriate look at whatever company we chose. And in the first year of our involvement in the competition, we decided to look at Ford Motor. So we had quite a few different ways that we thought we could look at it, but of course we sat down first and thought, what are we trying to accomplish? What do we know? And more importantly, what don't we know? So the consensus that our team came to is that we were attempting to demonstrate that it's not just incumbent upon these companies to represent environmentalism, but that's eminently desirable for them from a financial standpoint. And once we had that established, we were able to look at our individual niches. So we had the political science individual looking at the company's governments, our sustainability individual looking at the environmental science, the data scientist taking all the research that we had combined and finding out what we could draw from it, and of course any other relevant portions for business and finance and whatever other expertise we could gather from the numerous professors and mentors that helped us throughout the program. And through all of that work, we found that while we came in very confident that we knew a lot, we know a lot about the environment, we know a lot about our individual subjects, we knew very little. It's one of those things where we came in very confident that we knew our niches incredibly well, especially within this space, given the image of the Baton Honors College. But to have the opportunity to have the practical knowledge, not just in an educational setting, and find out what's relevant in the field, what's relevant to these companies, what do we need to do to make the progress that we'd like to see, and how can the endowment benefit from that? So once we were able to find that, we spent a lot of time doing our research on Ford and finding, well, here's what we didn't know, what do we need to know to gather it? And once we found that information, we put together a comprehensive shareholder engagement strategy. and that was to engage Ford Motor on a recycling program. So at the time they were establishing a new gigafactory in Tennessee, we thought that it would be an effective plan to establish a lithium-ion battery recycling plant specifically targeted to electric vehicles. Justified the expenditures for it, tried to draw up revenue and profit streams, and demonstrate that this presented a significant opportunity for them to protect against risk, right? Very unstable market, and have an in-house system where they could have access to this lithium and all these different metals would be beneficial to the company. And then after the corporate engagement challenge had concluded, we actually wound up winning that year, which we were, shocked by, extraordinarily proud collectively. But I had the opportunity to come and speak to the Board of Trustees on the work we did and how that could be represented within what we're doing and within the principles of IEN.
Who were some of the competitors in that?
Some of the competitors school-wise?
Yeah.
If I recall correctly, Yale had entered, Berkeley, and NYU Stern, many other schools, Bard, Arizona State. The list goes on and on and on. It was very lovely to hear their insights as well throughout the whole process. And had the privilege again of competing against them last year where, along with my co-lead, who's actually here today, Jessica Wilson, we wound up being a finalist again last year. So very proud of the team. And that wound up transitioning us. Thank you. So after we had these successes of the team, the $50,000 fund came to mind. And that came after I had the opportunity of explaining what we were doing to the Board of Trustees within our first year. And so far we've seen the footsteps. Where are we going to go? Are we going to follow the path that we've set out for ourselves? Right now, it is in the elementary state where we have this consensus from the environmental standpoint. We know what our alignment is within our own organization and within the institution. And of course, we're learning our expertise and learning how we can better develop it. So right now we're at that basic point of learning, well, what do endowments prefer mostly? Because we found what we prefer as students and what we'd like to see for companies and what might benefit them, but what's going to benefit our institution overall. So we've spent a little bit of time looking at basic things like DuPont analysis and learning how are we going to find appropriate values for these companies, reading 10Ks, I know that was a very important thing mentioned before, and just going over a lot of that basic stuff so that once we have that, we can move on to our more complex portions and find out, well, what exactly are we going to benefit from in investing within these companies? Is this something that's going to benefit the institution, not just during our tenure here, but for the foreseeable future? And one of the best parts of that program is that we're going to have people coming in to speak to us, where it's not just going to be something where we're reading books and we're gaining all this knowledge through interacting with one another in the classroom, but having experts in the field such as yourselves to come in and speak to us and say, well, this is what we're looking at. This is what's important in the field now, and being able to take those insights and not only just use them in our own lives, but most importantly, use them for that fund.
Yeah. Pretty impressive. I might add that Rowan has been an inspiration in so many things on campus, also part of the Ethics Bowl team that has won state championship a couple times. But I would be remiss if I didn't say the donor is not just giving money to us to invest and then forgetting about us. Maynard Schaus was developing a master's program in environmental studies. And because these students that have been recruited through this wonderful endowment fund are so self-motivated and so bright, many of them finish in 3 years. And when the donor set up the fund, it was to be a 4-year residential college. And Maynard's idea was, well, why don't we still hold true to them on the 4th year and encourage them to stay here and work on a master's degree in one of our master's programs. So Maynard designed a master's program in environmental studies, but we also have 5 other master's programs, and our first cohorts this year are coming out of the 3 years in the Batten Honors College and moving right into the 4th year with our donors' blessing that the 4th year be used for graduate study here. So what a wonderful program.
Yeah, something I'm excited to take advantage of myself.
Good.
Well, I think we're out of time, and we're going to get to small groups, but I'll just, obviously this is a really integrated approach. We didn't get into kind of the actual measurement of the portfolio, which I know. We did. Okay. Well, so let me point you all to one thing that I know is probably one of the greatest tools IEN provides, and that's their roadmap on this kind of journey. And we use something similar, kind of discovery. What is something like environmentally sustainable mean to the institution expression? What do you actually write in the investment policy statement? Then actually reporting and tracking, how are you doing according to your defined targets? And then improvement, right? So how are you measuring kind of, are we moving in the direction we want? Because, a lot of us have private investments in the portfolio or managers that aren't marketable, and so there are things happening beneath the surface on a that you don't have clarity to on a daily basis. And so all of that has to be kind of thought through and part of the framework as you move on this journey. But I think
and I think, Allie, if I don't mind, before we look at performance and a lot of other things, that's the one thing we sort of start with, is looking at, how are we tracking? And I think that's a very important part, because it helps center you in the right way, because performance it's now moved down to the last item, but it used to be at the top item. But I think it helps center you when you're doing good, when you're doing the right thing.
yeah.
And one thing, and I'll do my advertisement for Brown Advisory here from a different perspective also, is they've become partners with us, not just as our outsourced endowment officers, not just as donors to develop a student investment fund, but they also have a wealth management division. And a number of their clients in the wealth management division have been inspired by the success of the partnership between the university and Brown Advisory. And we're delighted that their wealth management clients have shown an interest financially in growing the endowment and in other programs on our campus. So that's a teamwork thing from you all and us that has worked out very well also. I think they said 10. We have till 2:20.
Yeah, so we can actually open up for Q&A now, so if anyone has questions.
Yeah, and I mean, I just, go ahead with your question.
I was just curious when you talk about what do you want to measure? What's important to each institution? So could you give a few examples of some of the different metrics that you're measuring?
Yeah, so again, environmental. Did you hear the question? It was sort of like, what are you measuring is the question, and not as elegant of a way as you expressed it. But so because environmental sustainability is one of the key pillars of the Baton Honors College, that has really risen to be one of the top criteria that we're thinking about. And so, when you think, I think most of the people in the room are aware, but you have sort of different tools you can take. There's exclusionary, and then there's proactive engagement. And we use both. So we're tracking things like carbon emissions on the, wanting to ensure that the portfolio is making progress there, and then also proactive engagement. And so one of the things, that might be investing in sort of energy transition businesses or proxy voting, or ways that we engage with companies to make sure their disclosure is becoming more transparent and fair, and that they're actually moving toward targets. And our firm is a little bit unique in that we have an open architecture approach where we're utilizing external managers, but we also have internal equity and fixed income strategies. So we have people doing individual company research that can provide their own metrics on sort of what the companies in an external manager, how they're ranking. So not only is it sort of the quantitative analysis, but it's the feedback from actually engaging with that individual company on what they're doing proactively. And I think, just yesterday or 2 days ago, there was an article in the New York Times about outflows from ESG funds. And it's like, it's inflows, outflows. There's a lot of noise in the space, as everybody knows. I think, how we approach it is really like smart investing. You just look at what has happened over the past few years with supply chain disruption. And our companies that were more sustainably aligned, that had broader diversification in their supply chain networks, for example, are ones that perform better during sort of the disruption of COVID or Russia's invasion of Ukraine and so forth. And so we really think that, that the data and the work that we're doing to analyze the company's sustainability and their move toward being kind of a positive contributor to society is going to generate stronger performance over time. But that said, we hold ourselves to a really high standard of tracking the manager's performance to every other similar strategy in the universe. So we're not trying to beat the other sustainable strategies. We're trying to meet all the relevant strategies in that space.
I just tag on there. I think when you think about Virginia Wesleyan, the environment is just part of our DNA. The Joan Brock room that we're in is also the Brock Environmental Center for Chesapeake Bay Foundation. We have an environmental research vessel at the Virginia Aquarium where we have a lake over here, we have the ocean over there, we have state parks. I mean, we're just in the midst of this, and so we can't, turn our head without encountering the importance of honoring the environment.
So I think it was Andrew maybe brought up this notion of, folks who are focused on ESG or have a longer time horizon, right? We're looking out 20 years, not the next 3. So I'm curious, sort of when you revisited your investment policy statement, did you sort of change, make explicit or whatever your expectations for sort of the period over which you were going to evaluate the managers?
I don't think we've changed. It's a conversation that comes up every meeting because we've got to provide cash flow for these scholarships. So, we've sort of got weights on two sides of which one's more important. And the fact that we're in the early stages, we were also given cash initially, so it made it easier to transition, I'll call it. We're still on the runway, I would call it. We're not where we want to be. We haven't allocated out on places we want to allocate to. So come back to me in 5 years. I can answer it better.
And we also decided, and that this was with our friends at Brown, we could have jerked everything out of our former investment plan and instantly put it in to new investments that met the criteria, or we could phase it periodically so that we didn't take huge losses. And we've been very strategic over the 2.5, I guess it's 2.5 years, isn't it? About now? 2.5 years. So that we are moving, it didn't all happen at once. It has to be phased in so that we don't take losses well.
Yeah, and I'll just say, we're still, I think as fiduciaries investing for the long term. It's a perpetual pool of capital. So the time horizon is, meet the needs of today for the university, but make sure it's preserved for future generations.
Allie, we're about 85% to target on our asset allocation. Is that about right?
Yeah, the real challenge for everybody is, when your endowment doubles and you have a private equity target, it takes a while to get there. So that's really, the private investments are what take longer to invest.
But the key for us as an institution has been the environmental guiding principles. Because whether we have a business major, a religion major, a teacher education major, everything is focused on the environmental guiding principles. And again, presidents change, deans change, trustees change, students change, professors change, but those environmental guiding principles are now embedded in all of our policy documents and in our mode of operandi. I think he's been waiting for a question now for a couple times around.
Question about the timeline for creating the investment policy statement, and then were there any challenges with the Board of Trustees in getting approval of the update? Not everyone is going to be an investment expert like Gary, so how does that work? Because I'd love to know for other universities that haven't done this yet, what kind of expectations could be shared with them. And
let me start and then I'll hand it off to you. Sure. So first of all, I go back once again to the environmental guiding principles, because every year we restate them, we include them in the board materials, and the environment became a priority, and that's Elizabeth's agenda that she's had here for a long time. So when we have a donor who comes along and says, I'm making this size gift and my preference is that it be handled in an environmentally friendly way, it made it easier for us. It wasn't just coming out of the blue. It was something that we had been talking about. And Elizabeth, when I called her to tell her what the donor did, she was like in shock, because she said she'd been talking about it for 10 years and had never, or more, and there had never been any progress in it. So, the initial gift from the donor moved us one part of the way, and Gary and our Board of Trustees actively embraced that and supported it, because we had been it wasn't just something new, we had been talking about it.
Yeah, I think it's, again, part of the culture of the university. Most of our trustees, up until the last 5 years, were very local. So you knew each other, you spent time with each other, you socialized with each other. So you had a familiarity, which is different now that we've got trustees all over the country. So it made it a little bit easier to work together. But then again, part of the culture was once the committee had resolved its issues, going to the full board, it wasn't rubber stamped, it never is. We've got a couple of trustees that always ask very piercing questions. And as long as you can answer them, they won't fight you on them. But I mean, again, I just give it, a lot of it to the culture of the university.
And again, I mean, I just have seen it work best when those types of questions come up that make the committee meeting or like an approval or disapproval challenging. Sometimes it's getting sort of the small working group together to review and get data that's helpful to them and then use that, because sometimes it's just hard to get from point A to point B without some work in between,
We have a very corporate-looking board, and when all of a sudden the endowment goes from 50-some million to 120 million, the most popular committee to be on became finance and endowment. There's so much, I mean, we learn something every time. It's an educational process too, but there's something that's significant, transformational for the institution, and heavy participation there.
Go ahead. It's okay.
Oh, we got two.
Thank you for a great conversation. I'm particularly interested in the relationship between fundraising and endowment strategy. You both, I think the president board chair mentioned that because of your commitment to the environment, you've been able to secure some additional fundraising opportunities that might not otherwise be available. I'm paying particular attention to the trend in philanthropy, where philanthropists are beginning to invest in endowments rather than in programmatic dollars or dollars for other capital. So I wonder, sort of, as you're engaging that fundraising group, are they excited about the pivot to ESG? Are they concerned that it may lead to a longer horizon of returns and therefore have hesitancy in sort of committing to the endowment model for fundraising approaches? Are you seeing a balance between the two? Just interested in your thoughts there.
So the genius in all this was a man who was president back in the 1980s named Lambeth Clark. And he was a development-oriented president who had come here to lead a young institution. And as the president of that young institution, he went out to all the corporate CEOs in the area and said, I want you to be on our board of trustees. And they all said, thanks, but I'm on the board at William & Mary, I'm on the board at UVA, I'm on the board at Virginia Tech. Without hesitation, he said, what about your wife? And I know we had the conversation about women in philanthropy and investment. This is one of those inspiring stories, because there were 8 to 10 women in the 1980s, at a time when women were not really in leadership positions or on boards, who came on the board here, fell in love with this place, and as the decades passed, their commitment to this institution, even though only one of the group, one of maybe 8, attended this institution, they fell in love with the place. So as they matured as philanthropists, that love that they had for 30 years has paid a major giving dividend to the institution now. And I think the last sort that we did of our capital campaign, of course there are 8 major donors in that, 92% of the money had come from female philanthropists.
As you know, men tend to die earlier.
I wasn't going to say that, Gary.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Paris, and I'm honored to be here today as the Director of JEDI at the Intentional Endowments Network. And I'm here to introduce a discussion that will delve into a critical topic: racial equity in the investment process. Warren Wilson College has been at the forefront of embracing racial equity in their endowment investing process, and the case study focuses on these pioneering efforts. During the discussion, we will showcase how racial equity can be integrated into the fabric of endowment investing. and the impact it can have on creating lasting change. For those interested in delving deeper into Warren Wilson College's efforts, I would like to highlight that you can find more information about these endeavors and racial equity in endowment investing by referring to the IEN Racial Equity in Investing Primer. And today, here with us to provide valuable insights, we have brought together a group of experts who have researched and implemented racial equity investment strategies. I'm thrilled to embark on this intellectual journey with all of you during this opportunity for us to learn from each other and benefit from the wealth of knowledge and experiences present in this room. Thank you all for being part of this conversation, and with that, I will turn the conversation over to Judy and our esteemed discussants. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, you call this an intellectual journey, so that's a very high standard that we have to meet. My name is Judy Chambers. I'm a managing principal of private markets consulting for Makita Investment Group, and Makita has the pleasure to work with Warren Wilson College. And today we have 3 people who are very hands-on with the endowment. We've got Anthony Rust, who's trustee and chair of the investment committee. And then we've got Somali Sanyal, managing director and senior portfolio manager, systematic global equities at Exponents. So she's one of the investment managers that helps the endowment to implement its goals. And then we've got Jalen Spann, senior associate at White Stop Capital. And she has a very interesting perspective because she works on kind of the data, getting the data together. So I'm going to hand it over first to Tony to talk about Warren Wilson College, what you do, how you do it, and why you do it.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Warren Wilson and how we started on our journey and work in this area. But I'm going to take you back to sort of the beginning. So in 2015, the Board of Trustees was petitioned by the student body to divest our portfolio of fossil fuels. And after much deliberation with Makita Investment Group, we did an analysis of the impact financially on the portfolio of having no fossil fuel investments. Ultimately, the conclusion was drawn that the impact was de minimis. There were times when fossil fuels helped the portfolio from a financial performance standpoint. There were times when fossil fuels was a drag on performance. So ultimately, the committee made the decision to move forward and divest the portfolio of fossil fuels. In 2015, that was the first year that I became chair of the investment committee. So the petition was well received by myself and ultimately by the committee at whole. But I posed the question to the committee, do we want to stop there, right? Or do we want to be more intentional with the holistic management of the portfolio? And after 9 months of working with our consultant and other experts, we ultimately made the decision that we wanted to be more intentional about how we manage the entire portfolio, not just stop at negative screens like fossil fuel divestment. And so ultimately the conclusion was we wanted our portfolio and our endowment fund on a whole to reflect not only our goal for maximizing financial performance, but also to reflect the values and the culture we are as a liberal, progressive institution. And that those two, financial performance and our purpose or mission of environmental and social sustainability, as well as believing that governance does make a difference in how companies perform financially, that and financial performance are not inextricably linked. And so we set off on this goal to take active ownership of our portfolio and our endowment fund, not just on the investment side, but also on the shareholder engagement proxy voting side. It really took a comprehensive approach to doing this. And we started off with the investment policy, right? And we revised and we amended the investment policy significantly in 2016. And there are 8 major areas that we focused on. The first was incorporating ESG criteria across asset classes. And conveying that message to our investment managers. that was a critical importance to us, and therefore we were looking for investment managers who did incorporate ESG criteria into their investment analysis of companies, whether they're buying their bonds or their stocks, or whether it's private markets. The second area was we incorporated positive screens. Things like food and agriculture and sustainable investments were important to us. We also incorporated selectively the use of negative screens, not just on fossil fuels, but on other things like gun manufacturers, in trying to exclude them from the portfolio if a significant portion of their income and revenues or business was derived from gun manufacturing. The third area we focused on, actually the fourth area we focused on was economically targeted investments, where we said we wanted to put investments in the state of North Carolina. We either wanted to support industry by investing in healthcare in the state of North Carolina, or buying economic development bonds that were in the secondary market, or hiring managers, some managers from the state of North Carolina to help create jobs in the state and support the local economy. The fifth area we focused on was diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we launched an inclusive initiative where we said, going forward, all of our searches, whether it's small cap growth, large cap value, emerging markets, private markets, across all asset classes, needed to include women and minority-owned investment firms in their search. Because we all know, at least most of us know, that traditional consultants have never really included emerging managers or minority managers as part of their search, or certainly not as part of their short list. So we tasked Makita Investment Group that we said going forward we wanted to do that because we believe that there was opportunities out there that we were not seeing as an investment committee or an endowment fund. And then the sixth area we focused on was proxy voting. We ultimately, this past year, voted over 12,000 votes, proxy votes, on behalf of the endowment fund. And the seventh area we focused on was shareholder engagement, and you're gonna hear a little bit about that from Whistle Stop Capital. And then the last area we added to the investment policy was an ESG advisory committee to help guide us in this area. Specifically as it relates to racial equity, all right, there was 5 real areas that we focused on. One was this inclusive initiative that I told you about. So fast forward several years, 2023, today we have 22 managers that manage money across our portfolio in a variety of strategies. 7 of those managers are firms managed by people of color. So almost 1/3 of our portfolio is managed by firms of color, whether that be African American, Latino, or Asian American. So we're very proud of that. From a performance standpoint, because we always get the performance question after we articulate that. Last year, our 30-year number was top 5% of endowment funds under $100 million, and our 5-year number, we were in the top quartile. All right, and this is, thank you. And this is Nakubu numbers. And then last year, or this year, where our 5-year number is in the top 20%. So we're pleased to see that all the work that we've been doing is showing that financial performance is linked to the activities and that we've been doing. We cannot do this stuff alone, right? And so this is a lot, right? When you're talking about voting 10,000 or 12,000 proxies a year, when you're talking about selecting managers, I am the chair of the investment committee. I am not an employee of Warren Wilson College. So we needed the assistance of key partners in a variety of these areas. Makita Investment Group has been our partner in this area for 9 years, and we're pleased to have them. As You Sow has helped us significantly on shareholder engagement and proxy voting. Last year, we authorized 58 potential resolutions to be filed. Several of those were in racial equity, diversity, equity, inclusion, and other diversity initiatives. So As You Sow, As You Vote are key partners here. Exponents, manages a racial equity portfolio overlay for us in an enhanced index product. And Whistle Stop is critical because Whistle Stop provides a lot of the data that As You Sow uses. So we're pleased to be partnered with some great institutions to help us advance the priorities for our endowment fund. And then lastly, I'll say that if you haven't read the McKinsey studies that are out or other reports that talk about ties to financial performance tied to diversity, I encourage you to do that. As You Sow is about to come out with another report next month that further articulates that diversity, companies that are more diverse lead to better performance. All right, and it's pretty simple for us and our committee and our trustees on our board. 41% of the U.S. population is non-white. To ignore 41% of the workforce is bad business. To ignore 41% of the consumer base is bad business. And so we believe in the social impact of diversity and racial equity, but we also know that it benefits our endowment fund financially. So I'm going to stop there.
All right, and we're going to circle
pass it back to you.
We're going to have Somali introduce herself, introduce Exponents, and talk about what you do for the Warren Wilson College portfolio.
Sure. Thank you, Judy. So thank you for giving Exponents the opportunity to talk about our DEI strategy. And of course, thanks to Warren Wilson College for being a client. So just a brief background on Exponents. Exponents is a multi-strategy asset manager. We are women and diverse owned, and we believe in being a trusted solutions partner for our client. And we are very much committed to meeting their objectives of doing the right thing for them and doing the right thing for each other at the firm. And in order to do so, we employ very disciplined investment processes. So I lead the systematic equities platform at the firm. We are a quantitative platform. So everything is done in a very systematic way and keeping our client guidelines in mind. And we collaborate with our clients and consultants to customize strategies. Again, having a quantitative platform makes customization much more easier to do. So we take data from various sources and build strategies to meet our client guidelines. We also recognize that ESG is a very business relevant issue and is good for companies' long-term financial performance. We recognize that over time, that companies that adopt best practices in ESG will most probably outperform those that do not. And then as a woman and diverse-owned firm, we experience the S part of ESG in every day and in every way possible, both from a gender lens and also from the diversity perspective. So the unfortunate thing is that if you think of the three components of ESG, S is where you have the least available data. So that's the part that's least developed. You have lots of environmental data. Governance is, part of regular investment management. But S is something that is still kind of an evolving field. And that's where As You Sow enters the picture. So many of you in this room know about As You Sow. As You Sow is a nonprofit leader in shareholder advocacy, and they harness shareholder power to create lasting change by protecting human rights, reducing toxic waste, and aligning investments with values. So they have come up with this score of racial justice and workplace equity. There are actually two separate scores for all companies in the S&P 500 and the Russell 1000, and they're now extending it to the Russell 3000. And they actually post these scores publicly on their website, so anyone can go and take a look at that. And companies do take a look at their own scores and kind of get anxious when they find themselves scoring below their industry peers. And that gives As You Sow an opportunity to engage with them and bring about positive change. So about a year and a half ago, Exponents and As You Sow entered into an exclusive agreement so that Exponents could use their racial justice and workplace equity scores to build investment strategies for investors. And that data allowed us to elevate the S component in our strategies and also kind of allowed us to combine profits with purpose. And that is the strategy that Warren Wilson College is invested in. So for Warren Wilson College, the strategy, like Tony said, it's an enhanced index. It's a low tracking error strategy. And we combine the racial justice and workplace equity scores to come up with one score for the DEI overlay. We also use ESG data from Sustainalytics to do the ESG overlay. In addition to that, the energy sector is completely excluded from the portfolio, and any companies that are in the Carbon Underground 200 list are not allowed to be in the portfolio, which basically is the energy sector. But there is actually one company in the S&P 500, which is a utility company, not in the energy sector, but belongs in the Carbon Underground 200 list, which the Carbon Underground 200 list is like 100 of the coal companies and 100 of the oil and gas companies that have the biggest carbon reserves. It's a global list. So we use that to kind of meet two objectives in the portfolio. One is to have a targeted exposure to the DEI scores of 120% better than the index, which is S&P 500, and the ESG risk score 85% when compared to the S&P 500. Because it's risk, we want that to be lower, and the DEI score, we want it to be higher. And then, of course, like I mentioned, we have the exclusions, the energy exclusions. So we use an optimization process whereby there are dual objectives of minimizing tracking error and meeting these targets that I talked about. So that's how we have managed the portfolio. It's been less than a year since we've started managing it. But this particular strategy was launched, I would say, about 18 months ago for another client, and Warren Wilson College came into that strategy too. And we've had quite a few endowments reach out to us because they are interested in the strategy. So right now we have 5 clients in the strategy. Over like 18 months, we got 5 clients. And the best thing is, I mentioned our ability to customize. So like Warren Wilson put in this customization of no energy, Carbon Underground. There are other clients who are still using the DEI overlay, but their customizations are different. Some of them don't want the defense companies in there. They don't want any private prisons, so on and so forth. So there are different customizations, and we are able to accommodate those customizations and give them what they're looking for. And this whole process is very iterative. Like, we backtest the strategy, we show them how it's going to perform in different market environments. We specify all the constraints that we're putting in the portfolio. We present to their boards and the investment committees, make sure they're comfortable with what we are doing. They ask questions, we go back, we redo the tests again, and then we present the results again. And so it's a very collaborative process. Both the client and the consultants tend to be involved in it. But at the end of it all, it's something that everyone likes, is satisfied, and we're all on the same page. So I just wanted to touch briefly on the other aspects of the As You Sow partnership. One of those is the same point that Tony stressed, the proxy voting. So we also subscribe to As You Vote for those clients who want us to vote on behalf of them using values-based guidelines. So As You Vote, they actually work with a company called Proxy Impact, which is a proxy voting firm based on ESG principles. And the fees that we pay them for proxy voting, part of those fees actually goes to IEN to educate more endowments and foundations to become active investors. So it's kind of a virtuous cycle. And As You Sow, they can continue to develop their data, the granularity of the data, adding more data points. For example, in 2022, they added environmental justice to their racial justice scores. And because we have this exclusive agreement with them, we pay them a licensing fee. We also have some revenue share agreements. Part of that money is used in their corporate engagement efforts. So again, while we are serving our clients, we are also indirectly able to enable, as you saw, to elevate their corporate engagement efforts. And this is kind of meets our dual objectives, the dual objectives of Exponents, which is being a force multiplier for positive change while providing investment services to our clients. And then lastly, the focus on DEI. Again, something that Tony mentioned, we recognize this, we realize this, that incorporating DEI is becoming a necessity. Like, for example, for companies listed on NASDAQ, they have to disclose the diversity of their board. So there are frameworks and rules and regulations being put in place where DEI has become a necessity. And of course, many studies have shown that DEI, helps a company in a positive way. And then if you look at millennials and Gen Zs, they are looking for diverse employers. Diversity is important to them. And the browning of America, we've all heard about that. You mentioned 41%, and that number is increasing. So the composition of the workforce is changing. So asset owners, we think they are looking at investment managers like us, not only to see how investment managers are incorporating DEI into investment strategies, but also how they're incorporating DEI at their own organizations. So
Great.
That's kind of where we are.
No, great. So Jalen, I want you to talk about White Stop Capital and kind of the role you're playing in Warren Wilson's college's portfolio as well.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Jalen Span, and I lead the research team over at Whistle Stop Capital. We're based out in the Bay Area, and we are basically a consultancy. Our typical clientele, we work with endowments, foundations, asset owners, asset managers. And our sort of tagline is that we help not only identify, but then assist our clientele in addressing any environmental, social, governance concerns they have in their portfolio. One major way that we do this, and sort of loop around to how we're all connected here on this panel, is by shareholder advocacy. So engaging with all of the companies in our clients' portfolios. My sort of realm, my wheelhouse is workplace equity and diversity data. We actually manage As You Sow's workplace equity program, so that's sort of where Whistle Stop fits in this whole genre. And we act as sort of in outsourced workplace equity programs. You can lean on us for research, for data, for best practice, research that you're looking for. I feel like as investors, a huge part of shareholder engagement is obviously engaging with your company, but what do you talk to them about, right? You know that diversity, equity, and inclusion matters, but you're just going to pick up the phone and say, how are you doing? How are your employees doing? What best practice and standardized diversity data is out there that we should all be talking to our companies about? As far as Warren Wilson College is concerned, they have filed and been co-filer on a number of resolutions. One of those, that we have sort of working right now is with Cintas, C-I-N-T-A-S. They are a company that staffs, I think they do uniforms for like all of the, the manufacturing companies. Not a company that you would think, okay, we need to go and engage them on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I think when you're starting from the bottom, you can really grasp at whatever. For Cintas, they were a little bit unique in that they weren't releasing sort of the low-hanging fruit of diversity data, which we sort of deem the EEO1 report. I'm not sure how familiar everyone is in the room with EEO1 reports, but basically it's a breakdown of a company's workforce by gender and by race. And it's something that's legally mandated. This data isn't something that companies are going to have to put a whole bunch of, time, effort, and resources into gathering. This is something that they should already have internally. The only sort of caveat there is they are not legally required to make this data public. So they publish it to the EEOC. but they don't have to make this data public. So sort of the low-hanging fruit that we ask for is, hey, can you start with releasing this EEO-01 form? And Cintas, when we engaged with them, they hadn't even released this, and they still don't, actually. Their AGM was yesterday, so we're actually waiting on sort of voting results, so fingers crossed. But the resolution was supported by ISS, the Institutional Shareholder Services, so that's always a step in the right direction when you can sort of get the proxy advisors to really recognize, I guess, to really recognize that these issues are important. We've also had an engagement, a multi-year engagement with Berkshire Hathaway. They're my favorite story to tell. They're very unique, and I was just talking to Somali about this off stage. It's very much like Tesla. You either love Warren Buffett or you're not a fan. So it's a it was a big behemoth of a room to be in. But when we first started engaging with them, they also hadn't released EEO-01, which again, we consider the low-hanging fruit here. They're unique in the sense that they have a very decentralized management structure. I know we all see Warren Buffett, but we don't really think of the other 50+ companies that operate under the Berkshire umbrella. So we're looking for some standardization there, or at least some type of management or governance that's going to allow the type of data that we need to have as investors to be released in a standardized manner. You know, you wouldn't invest in 50 companies and then never check on them, right? So it just blows my mind sometimes how people invest in Berkshire and then they're like, okay, but you don't understand. There's like 50 other companies. You got to see, you know, what they're all doing. And the sort of the scorecard that Somali mentioned earlier is a really, really big key part of what we do for As You Sow in their workplace equity management program. Me and my research team, we actually go and research the the corporate sustainability reports and the ESG reports of all of these companies, 3,000 of them. So it takes us a couple months to get through that, and sort of the diversity data that we're looking for in addition to the EEO-01 form is, we call them in tandem the inclusion factors. So the promotion rates, the hiring rates or recruitment, retention rates or turnover. We're sort of using those terms interchangeably as companies sort of use them interchangeably. And those three in tandem really allow you to see who's moving through the workforce and, you know, at what rate, what types of people. And we're looking for this data to be broken out by gender and by race. And in the beginning, we didn't really have these parameters. So it was a little bit more difficult to have these conversations with companies as far as like them knowing what type of data we were looking for and in the way that was going to be most material to investors. I would say, well, no, last year we reached about an 80% withdrawal rate for our DEI resolutions. That was about 19 resolutions, and most of them were, you know, you hopped on the first call. We didn't have to do a lot of groundwork about why this data matters. A few years ago, there was a lot of groundwork for, you know, having to just start from square one as to why this data is even important. Now we're not even having those conversations. It really is us trying to get a better understanding to the barriers to release this data. Some companies have shared, you know, they've been very frank and they've said, you know, our retention rates are not great. We have very high turnover. We don't know how to report that in a way that just makes it look like we have really high turnover. Like, how do we make sure that our narrative is being told, right? And it really is a two-part story. It's not just, you know, asking for data's sake, but we also really stress the importance of having that qualitative story behind it. We are also hoping to issue with some sort of guidance as far as these terms go. So there's some type of standardization around that, because what one company would deem a promotion, another company might not. You know, what is a promotion? Is it a lateral move? Is it a job title change? Is it a pay increase, et cetera? So really trying to get some type of standardized reporting from all of the Russell 3000 companies.
Okay. So I know there are probably a ton of questions in the audience. Sure. I'll kick it off. So Tony, how did you get the rest of your board engaged on board to move forward with this initiative? Because again, working with different types of clients, this always tends to be a very big area where it can be kind of polarizing, shall we say, in the boardroom. So how did you do it with Warren Wilson College?
It started off with education, right? We spent really 9 months, close to 10 months, educating investment committee members as to the value of diversity, equity, inclusion, value to the performance. We brought in experts to talk to the investment committee. We provided research with the help of Nikita, as well as others like IEN. And so it took time. It certainly was building consensus as opposed to, forcing it from, a certain segment of the investment committee. So, and, we've, in retrospect, everybody has, said it was a great idea, and we're doing well, and we're viewed as a leader in the space, and the performance is great. So the folks, the naysayers were, more not just anti-DEI, but anti-ESG on the investment committee, and they just needed to be proven that that there was value, financial value, in the things that we were trying to do.
And so very often when the topic of emerging and diverse managers come up, there's always the immediate perception of I'm sacrificing returns, or the portfolio is going to take a hit. And so how did you get the board in particular comfortable with that? Because I always get that question a lot when presenting to clients, well, how long are we going to have to take this hit for? It's like, well, who said you're taking a hit?
Right, right. Yeah, no, we certainly the investment firms of color that we brought in to, share in a search opportunity, had the financial investment experience and performance to be able to execute. And, the numbers, were as good, if not better, than most of the majority firms that came in for a particular search, and that's why, we hired them. And many of the investment committee members said, I'd never heard of these firms before. Where did they come from, right? And so, little knock on the consultant industry has never really cast a wide net sufficiently in order to show the value that, a lot of investment managers of color that are doing. So.
And Somali, your firm is a diverse owned firm. At one point you were emerging, but you've been around so long, so you've kind of overcome that. And so how do you continue to customize things for other clients? And what other services do you offer some of your other clients? Because they don't all look and act like Warren Wilson College.
No, absolutely not. So we are, firstly, Exponence actually has different platforms. I just represent the equities platform. We also have a fixed income platform. We have a manager of managers platform where we actually seed emerging managers, some of which are diverse, or majority of them are diverse, some are not, but they're all emerging managers. We also have a private equity platform and a fintech platform. So we are, in some ways, like I said, a multi-strategy firm. And again, because of our capabilities, having a robust investment platform has allowed us to cater to all of our clients. So whenever a client comes to us with their investment needs, we always want to provide an answer for them. And so, for example, the As You Sow data, we weren't aware of As You Sow, but when a client came looking for a DEI strategy, we were actually made aware of it by a consultant, and we immediately engaged with As You Sow, and started this process of getting this new source of data. So we're always on the lookout for new sources of data so that we can meet client needs. So it has been a very collaborative process in that way.
Okay. So I want to open it up to questions from the audience. One in the back.
Hi. First of all,
I want to congratulate you. Wonderful presentation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. A couple of questions for you. Number one, when we look at timelines, everybody has performance that's up and down depending on how you look at it and when. So my first question is, are you prepared for when the moment comes and your performance isn't what someone thought it should be, that they're gonna come back and say, now Tony, look at these results. So that's number one. Number two, I heard you talk about, whenever you mention emerging or diverse managers, there's usually this, well, am I going to have to sacrifice returns? Which in my mind tells me that there's an internal conversation for that person that's basically saying, I know that brown and black people are inferior, so therefore I'm going to get lower returns. So with that being said, my question is, did you really help dismiss that in 9 months of education? What's the work that's you are continuing to do to dismiss or to help, get rid of that internal voice that we all have, including myself, that will tell us subconsciously, brown is inferior?
Yeah.
You take number one, I'll take number two.
Sure.
Take a little bit of the heat off.
Okay. So we evaluate our managers not on absolute performance, but on relative performance to their peers. And so on an annual basis, we will compare them to others managing that strategy and determine where they fall. But we will give managers, several years to rectify any poor performance before, having that hard conversation or determining that you should be put on a watch list. Hopefully that answers your question.
Right. So I think from an educational standpoint, it's continuous. So I've been an investment consultant for 16 years, and for 16 years I've been working with clients to help them set up new programs, incorporate emerging and diverse managers, identify who's new to the marketplace, and what have you. And so it's a constant process, and you really only overcome it by showing the proof, by saying the proof is in the pudding, which is at the end of the day, on a net of fee basis, is this manager making money, right? So the goal is to treat emerging and diverse managers as you would treat any other manager in your portfolio. They all have goals they need to meet. They all need to beat benchmarks as it relates to their peers, and they need to make money for you so that you can continue as an endowment and a foundation to stay alive. And so there's nothing different in terms of the analysis of how we look at them. They breathe the same air, they do the same things, they're smart, they're educated, and all this other stuff. And so that's just something that we constantly have to get across to people, is that this is an actual opportunity. I had colleagues come to New York last week and they did a road show, and half of the managers they met with were emerging and diverse managers who have phenomenal performance. And they were like, wow, we've heard these guys, we know they're in client portfolios, but we hadn't actually met them and seen the team and all this stuff. And that needs to happen all the time. So now that when another client comes and says, I cover private equity, so we're looking for a small middle market private equity manager, we've got a long list of emerging, diverse, non-emerging, non-diverse, or what have you, and then we let the numbers speak for themselves.
Could I also add on to your question? So we have, my investment committee is made up of 7 people, and 5 out of the 7 are older white men who have some connection to the investment industry. And it took a while to convince them, but they were data driven, show me the data. And most of them have come around. There is one who's still on the committee who's one of the staunchest non-believers in ESG, but he is buying in. It's taken time. We also actually, and I'm not sure if your respective organizations, but in the aftermath of the racial unrest and George Floyd killing, we had unconscious bias training. for all trustees. And that seemed to help as well. So.
Fred.
So first of all, congratulations on the work that you guys have all done. I think the fact that all four of you are speaking together and describing your experiences highlights how you need this whole ecosystem to work for capital to be as effective as it can be. You're giving all the highlights of all the things that have gone well and how you've achieved all the success. What have been the stumbling blocks? What have been the moments where it feels like you weren't able to implement everything that you want it to be, or where you still feel that you're a ways away from your goals?
So I could say time. You know, there's a lot more we'd like to do. There's more screens that we might want to implement. You know, we didn't fire managers because they weren't 100% in. And I'll give you a perfect example, and this is how it's become a collaborative process, right? So in the aftermath of the racial unrest, and I think I have one of our investment firms is here too, Breckenridge, we surveyed all of our investment managers, sent out a survey, solicited information about specifically, because we wanted to drill down, how are you incorporating racial equity criteria within your ESG framework? All right, most of them came back and said no. So this follow-up question was, well, let's have a conversation about why you should, and then let's have a conversation, what does that look like? So for example, if you're evaluating a company to buy its bond or its stock, right? Have you looked at their EEO-1 data? Have you looked to see if they have any EEOC violations related to race? If they're a financial institution, have you looked at their CRA rating? All right. Have you looked at their corporate board diversity? So things like that. Have they issued public disclosures on diversity, equity, inclusion? So there's things like that that many of our investment managers hadn't incorporated into in their evaluation of a company, or whether they're buying their stock or bond. And most of them now are factoring those into their investment processes.
The last question in the back.
Hi, my name is Dorian Nunez, President of Omni Research and IEN Senior Fellow. And I just wanted to thank the panel, but I also wanted to make everyone in this room aware of the vast resources that IEN has already accumulated on this particular subject. Harvard Business School did a study that showed that diverse managers perform just as well, if not better, than non-diverse. Stanford did a study that showed that implicit bias exists within the asset management industry. The McKinsey study was cited earlier. Everyone up there clearly is a member of IEN. The public fund sector is far out further in front than the university endowment sector. Last week, 2 weeks ago, just at a conference of 350 investment professionals, the governor of Illinois, the treasurer of Illinois. Exponents has $18 billion under management. They certainly could not be managing $18 billion if they weren't doing something right and were able to use diverse managers and others in a racial equity lens. So I know here we're preaching to either those who are already saved or those who are already seeking to be saved, which is fantastic. But I want, if you need more information, just talk to Paris Springs, Miss Paris Springs, and just go see Paris Springs. And we have a wealth of information that we're eager to share with you so that we can be data-driven and overcome the concept that people like the ones up on the stage aren't capable of managing money and developing superior returns.
Thank you, Dorian, and huge round of applause and thanks for our panel.